All right, folks, get ready because today we are diving deep into, the book of Genesis. You know, it's one of those books that everyone's heard of, but maybe not everyone has really sat down and wrestled with.
Right.
And I got to admit, I'm a little nervous to try to tackle such a huge topic.
It's a big one.
It is a big one.
Yeah.
But thankfully, I have our expert here with us today
Always.
who sees Genesis not just as a collection of stories, but as, history, literature, and theology all kind of rolled into one.
It is. It is.
So get ready, dear listeners, because we're going to explore how this ancient text, it speaks to all these modern questions that we still grapple with, science, language, even just what it means to be human.
Yeah, it's fascinating how a book written so long ago can still feel so relevant today.
Oh, absolutely. So let's jump right in. One of the things that always gets me about Genesis is how it describes creation.
Yeah.
It's not a science textbook, right?
It's
not giving us, a step-by-step scientific explanation. It's more like an experience.
Yeah, it takes a phenomenological approach.
Oh, okay. Phenomenological.
Yeah.
That's a mouthful. What does that even mean?
Well, it means that, imagine describing the world just through your senses.
Right.
Like what you see, what you hear, touch, smell.
Okay.
That's how Genesis lays out the creation story, right? It's about experiencing the world as it unfolds.
So instead of reading a scientific textbook,
right,
it's like we're actually there.
Yeah, like you're immersed in it.
Yeah, that makes sense. And that experience, it starts with a pretty bold statement. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And what's interesting is there's no Hebrew word for universe.
That's right.
So heavens and earth literally means everything.
Everything, the whole shebang.
Yeah. And then there's this structure to it. You know, it's not just random acts of creation.
No, there's a purpose, a deliberate progression.
Right.
God is creating a habitable world, culminating in humankind.
Okay, so each step is setting the stage for the next.
Exactly. Each act of creation builds upon the one before it.
Yeah, that's cool. And speaking of humankind, one of the big mysteries of Genesis is this whole idea of being made in the image of God. What does that even mean? I mean, it's caused so much debate over the centuries.
Oh, yes. But I think we often get bogged down in these abstract interpretations.
Right.
What if we look at the V or BS, the actions?
The verbs, okay.
Yeah. What does God do in Genesis? He communicates, creates, evaluates, names things.
Oh, interesting. And those are all things humans do too.
Exactly, just on a different scale.
Right, right.
So it's not about looking like God, it's about sharing in these fundamental activities.
So our ability to create, to communicate, to make judgments, these are all reflections of that divine image.
I think so. It's like we're mini creators in a way.
That's a really powerful thought. And, even the divine name itself reflects this shift.
Oh, that's right.
It moves from Elohim to Elohim, Yahweh Elohim.
Right, incorporating that covenant name, Yahweh.
It's like this deepening of the relationship between God and humanity.
Exactly. It signifies that special connection that God establishes with us.
But how does that square with God being all-powerful? If we're made in his image, reflecting those same abilities, does that limit God's power in any way?
Well, it's a great question. And it gets to the heart of how we understand God's nature.
Yeah.
God is all-powerful.
Right.
But Genesis suggests that he chooses to share that power with us.
So it's an act of generosity.
Yes, exactly. God invites us into this creative partnership with him.
Wow. And that's beautifully illustrated in how man is actually created, right?
Yes. Yeah.
The text uses that very specific Hebrew verb, yatsar, which means
to mold or shape, like a potter.
So it's not just poof, man appears,
Right. There's artistry involved.
Intentionality.
It's almost like a sculpting process,
Yeah, God is really taking his time with this.
And then there's that beautiful contrast with God breathing life into Adam.
It's such a personal touch.
It is. It's not just a biological process. It's
like a gift.
Yeah, it's God giving this unique and precious gift of life.
And it definitely sets it apart from, a purely scientific explanation of human origin.
Totally. It adds this layer of mystery and wonder. And speaking of mystery and wonder, that brings us to the fall.
Ah, yes.
There are a lot of interpretations out there that try to downplay the significance of it.
Yeah, yeah.
But, if we zoom out a bit and look at the bigger picture of the Bible, the fall becomes this key event in this cosmic struggle between good and evil.
Right. It's not just a story about Adam and Eve disobeying.
It's bigger than that.
It's about something much bigger. Yeah.
Yeah. And you mentioned Romans 16.20 and Christ's victory over Satan.
Mm-hmm.
How does that tie into the fall exactly?
Well, Paul's words in Romans, he says, the Lord Jesus Christ crushed Satan under your feet. Right. Yeah.
That echoes what we see in Genesis.
Interesting.
It suggests that, the fall isn't just about one act of disobedience.
Yeah.
It's about the entrance of sin and death into the world.
It's like this turning point.
Yes. And it sets the stage for Christ's redemptive sacrifice.
So the fall isn't just an isolated event. It's like the beginning of this much bigger story.
Exactly. The story of redemption that plays out throughout history.
Yeah. And one thing that's always tripped me up is that, Adam and Eve are judged, but they're not cursed.
Right. That's an important distinction.
It is. So what are the curses?
Well, the ground is cursed, right?
Okay.
Making life harder for humanity.
Right.
And then the serpent is cursed, representing evil's opposition to God.
Okay.
But here's the thing. Death, which is introduced as a consequence of sin, it actually becomes a means of life.
Whoa, that's a deep thought. Death as a means of life.
Yeah, because Adam's mortality.
Yeah.
It paves the way for Christ to die for humanity's sins.
Yeah. So it flips the script on that whole, ascent of man idea.
It does. It's not constant progress.
Right.
What we see after the fall is this, gradual descent.
Right.
A degradation of humanity.
And it starts with Cain murdering Abel.
Yes, exactly. And it continues from there.
And you mentioned that example of Lamech.
Oh, yes.
He's a descendant of Cain, and he boasts about murder in poetry.
I know, right?
What's up with that? Why is that detail so important?
Well, it shows this perversion of language and art, right?
Right. Poetry is supposed to be beautiful.
Exactly. But here, it's twisted to glorify violence.
So it's like a reflection of the inner state of humanity at this point.
Yeah, this moral decay, this nebula,
Ooh.
The Hebrew word for folly.
Folly, right.
It really captures that downward spiral.
Right, so we've got this corruption that's woven into the fabric of Genesis.
Mm-hmm.
But there's also this structure to it,
Oh, absolutely.
This backbone that kind of holds it all together.
You're talking about the genealogies, right?
Yeah, the genealogies. I'll be honest, I used to just skim over those.
I get it. They can seem a bit dry.
They do. But you're saying they're more than just lists of names?
Oh, there's so much more. They're the framework of Genesis.
Okay.
They connect it to later biblical books like Ruth and Matthew.
Interesting.
They provide this historical context, this lineage that runs through the whole story.
So skipping over them, we're missing out on some key information.
Exactly. You're missing those threads that tie everything together.
Yeah. And you were saying they're full of fascinating details.
Oh, yes. For example, take those 10 genealogies in Genesis 5.1 to 9.29.
Okay.
They constantly mention death, except for one.
Ooh, now I'm curious. Who's the exception?
Enoch.
Enoch. Okay.
He's taken up by God.
Taken up by God. So he never experiences death.
Nope. It's like this hint of something different, something beyond that cycle of sin and death.
So a glimmer of hope.
Exactly. It makes you wonder, why Enoch? What made him so special?
Yeah, it really does. And that whole idea of escaping death, transcending our limits, it pops up again in the flood narrative.
Oh, absolutely. The flood is like an uncreation.
Uncreation.
Yeah, like a return to those primordial waters of Genesis 1.2.
Okay.
It's a global event, wiping the slate clean.
Like a total reset for humanity?
Totally. The Hebrew word kol is used over and over, meaning all.
Okay.
Emphasizing the totality of the destruction.
Wow, so there's no escaping this one.
Nope.
But even after the flood, things aren't perfect, right?
Far from it.
Yeah, what happens?
Well, the first thing Noah does after the flood is curse his son, Ham.
He curses Ham. Really?
Yeah. It's a reminder that sin is still very much present.
So even Noah, this righteous dude who found favor with God, he still messes up.
Yeah, it challenges that whole idea of good versus bad characters.
Right. It's like no one's perfect.
Exactly. We're all flawed.
And there's another shift after the flood too, right?
Oh, yeah.
The genealogies change.
They do. The word death disappears and lifespans start to shrink.
Wow. That's a big change. What's the meaning behind that?
It seems to mark a new era, a fresh start.
Okay.
But it also recognizes that we're not the same as we were before.
Right.
We're still vulnerable.
And it really throws a wrench in those evolutionary theories about lifespan.
Oh, yeah. It challenges those.
Yeah, it raises some interesting questions.
Definitely.
So even in this new beginning, there's still this shadow, right?
Yeah, it's bittersweet.
And that brings us to the Tower of Babel. You know, the story where humanity tries to reach heaven, and that's where languages originate.
According to Genesis, yes.
It's a direct challenge to those evolutionary theories about language.
It is.
So where does language come from? What does Genesis say?
Genesis offers a specific explanation.
Okay.
It ties into that table of nations in Genesis 10.
How so?
Well, the Tower of Babel explains how humanity, once united by a single language, becomes divided. And that linguistic diversification, it's directly linked to the scattering of people across the earth.
Like their ambition backfires.
It does. They're trying to reach heaven to make a name for themselves.
Yeah.
But they end up scattered and divided.
Name, that's key there, right?
Yes. The Hebrew word Shem, meaning name.
Got it.
It's a reminder that only God can truly make a name. And humanity's attempt to, usurp that power.
Yeah.
It leads to chaos.
And the text itself reflects that, right? You were telling me about that.
Oh, it's fascinating. The Hebrew text of the Babel story, it has these repeated sounds.
Oh, wow.
And when you string them together,
they
spell the word nebula.
Meaning folly. So the tower itself is a monument to human folly.
It is.
That's incredible. The very structure of the text reinforces the message.
It does, it does.
And then we move into Genesis 11, and we get the genealogy of Shem.
Right.
Which leads us to the Toledot of Terah. Yeah. But the Toledot of Terah is really about Abraham, isn't it?
You got it. It's a shift in focus.
Highlighting Abraham's importance.
Exactly.
And from here on out, there's this pattern in the genealogies.
Oh, that's right.
They often highlight the rejected line before the chosen one.
Yes, like Ishmael before Isaac.
Right, and Esau before Jacob.
Exactly. It's like God is setting up a contrast.
Yeah, to show us what could have been.
Yeah, it emphasizes God's choice. The unexpected twists and turns.
And speaking of cliffhangers, Genesis ends with Joseph in Egypt.
It does. Talk about a setup for Exodus.
It's brilliant. All of God's promises point to Canaan, but we end with Joseph, the chosen descendant, stuck in Egypt.
It's a reminder that God's plans often unfold in unexpected ways.
Wow, it really makes you think.
It does.
What must it have been like for Joseph, betrayed by his brothers, sold into slavery.
Yeah.
But then he rises to power.
It's a powerful message of hope.
It is. Even in the darkest of times, God can use our experiences for good. It's amazing how much we've covered already.
It is.
From creation to the fall, the flood, the genealogies, Abraham, Joseph. It's just incredible how much is packed into these first 11 chapters of Genesis.
I know, right?
But we are just getting started, folks. There's so much more to explore.
There is.
So stay tuned for our next segment as we dive even deeper into the mysteries and meaning of Genesis.
I can't wait.
So we left off talking about Joseph, stuck in Egypt.
Right.
What a cliffhanger.
It is.
But before we move on to Exodus, I kind of want to take a step back for a second and ask the big question.
What's that?
What does it all mean?
Yes, the meaning of it all.
We've explored all these stories, these characters, the events.
Yeah.
But how does it connect to U.S.?
Right.
Like people living in the 21st century.
That's the question, isn't it? How does this ancient text speak to our modern lives?
Exactly. What are we supposed to take away from all of this?
Well, I think one of the most important things is to recognize that, these stories have enduring power.
Okay.
Genesis isn't just some old book,
Right.
It's a living narrative.
Okay, but how do we make sense of these ancient stories in a modern context?
I think by recognizing the universal themes that they explore.
Okay, themes that transcend time and culture.
Exactly. Take the story of Adam and Eve, for example.
Okay.
It's not just about a forbidden fruit.
Right, it's about something deeper.
It is. It's about the human longing for knowledge.
Okay.
That desire to understand the world, even if it means pushing boundaries.
Right.
And it's about temptation, that inner struggle between what we know is right and what we desire.
Oh, I feel that. The struggle is real.
It is. And it's about consequences.
Right, our choices have consequences.
Exactly. Even small decisions can have ripple effects.
Yeah, for sure.
That impact generations to come.
And speaking of consequences, the consequences of the fall are pretty huge.
They are. Sin and death enter the world.
Yeah, it's like this chain reaction.
It is. It's like this ongoing struggle.
But even with all that darkness, there's this glimmer of hope, right?
Yes, there is. Remember that curse on the serpent?
Yeah.
It foreshadows the eventual triumph of good over evil.
Oh, interesting.
It points towards redemption,
So redemption is kind of woven into the story from the beginning.
It is. It's this thread of hope that runs through the whole narrative.
And then you have Noah and the flood.
Right. It's like God hitting the reset button on humanity.
Giving us a second chance.
Exactly. Even when things seem hopeless,
Yeah.
God is still working.
He's offering grace and mercy.
Yes, and that grace is evident in the call of Abraham,
Right. Abraham, the father of faith.
leaving everything behind to follow God's call.
It's kind of a crazy story when you think about it.
It is. But it speaks to our own journeys of faith, doesn't it?
How so?
Well, those moments when we're called to step outside our comfort zones,
Yeah, when we have to trust in something bigger than ourselves.
even when we don't have all the answers.
Oh, absolutely. Have you ever felt like you were on the wrong path? Like unsure of your purpose? Like you were meant for something more?
Yeah, I think we've all felt that way at some point.
Abraham's story really speaks to that feeling, you know?
It does. It challenges us to think about what we're willing to sacrifice.
Right. What are we holding on to?
What are we willing to let go of to follow that call?
That's a tough question.
It is. But it also highlights God's faithfulness, don't you think?
Yeah. I mean, even when Abraham doubts, when he messes up,
God remains faithful to his promises.
he does. And Abraham's story is just the beginning, right?
It is. It sets the stage for the entire biblical narrative.
It's like the foundation.
It is. The patriarchs, the Exodus, the law, the prophets, Jesus, it all flows from Genesis.
So understanding Genesis is key to understanding the rest of the Bible.
I think so. It provides the framework for understanding God,
Yeah.
his plan for humanity, the triumph of good over evil.
It all starts here.
It does.
It's amazing to think about the impact of this one book.
It is. It's shaped our understanding of the world for thousands of years.
But how does it all connect to our lives today? What does it mean for us in the 21st century?
I think it means that we're not just random beings,
Okay.
adrift in a meaningless universe.
Right.
We're part of a larger story
A story that began with creation.
and continues to unfold today.
And we all have a role to play.
We do.
It's a pretty radical concept.
It is, especially in a world that emphasizes individualism.
Yeah, like we're all about self-reliance.
Right, but Genesis reminds us that we're part of something bigger.
And that our lives have meaning.
Yes, we have inherent worth and dignity because we're created in the image of God.
Wow, that's powerful.
And we're called to participate in God's work of redemption.
To bring healing and hope to the world.
Exactly.
It's a tall order.
It is, but it's also an incredible privilege.
It makes you think about like your own life choices, your actions, your relationships.
Yeah.
Like, how am I living out my part in this story?
That's a big question.
It is. And it's a great place to transition to our next segment.
Yeah, I think so.
We'll be right back after a short break. All right, we're back. And I gotta say, this whole deep dive into Genesis has really been eye-opening for me.
Oh, good. I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, it's made me look at these familiar stories in a whole new light.
That's what we're hoping for.
Yeah. We've covered so much ground: creation, the fall, the flood, Abraham, Joseph.
That's a lot to pack in.
It is, but I keep coming back to that question of like,
Mm-hmm.
what does it all mean for us?
Yeah, that's the big one, isn't it?
It is. Like, how do we connect these ancient stories to our lives today?
Well, Genesis is full of insights into human nature,
Yeah.
the nature of God, our relationship with the divine.
Right, but bridging that gap between like those ancient stories and our modern lives, it's not always easy.
Right.
I mean, it often feels like we're living in a totally different world.
It does. It does.
So how do we extract that timeless wisdom and like actually apply it to the challenges we face today?
I think one of the keys is to look beyond the literal interpretation
Okay.
and focus on the deeper themes.
Okay, give me an example.
All right, so the story of Adam and Eve,
Yeah.
it's not just about a piece of fruit.
Right, right.
It's about that human desire for knowledge, the struggle with temptation,
And the consequences.
Exactly. And those themes are still so relevant today.
Oh, absolutely. It doesn't matter how much the world changes, those fundamental struggles, they stay the same.
It's like they're woven into the fabric of human experience.
They are. And, Genesis doesn't shy away from the tough questions.
No, it doesn't.
Yeah.
It wrestles with good and evil, faith and doubt.
Obedience and rebellion.
Yeah, it's not a sugar-coated version of reality, that's for sure.
No, it's not.
And you mentioned redemption, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's a big theme in Genesis.
It is. It's like this thread of hope
Okay.
that runs through the whole narrative.
Okay.
Even in the midst of, tragedy and despair,
Yeah.
there's that glimmer of something better, a promise of restoration. So, like, even when things are bad, there's hope.
Yes. We see it in God's covenant with Noah after the flood.
Right.
His call to Abraham.
Right, right.
And ultimately, that promise of a Messiah.
Yeah, the Messiah who will redeem all of creation.
Exactly. And that's why Genesis is so foundational to our understanding of the whole Bible.
It sets the stage for everything that follows.
It does. Without Genesis, we wouldn't have the context to understand Christ.
His life, death, resurrection.
It all ties back to Genesis.
So it's not just stories, it's the foundation of our faith.
That's a great way to put it. And that foundation, it helps us understand our place in the world.
Yeah, our purpose.
Our relationship with God.
And it reminds us that we're not just random beings, you know?
We're part of a bigger story.
A story that began with creation.
And continues today.
And we each have a role to play.
We do. We're invited to participate in God's work of redemption.
To be agents of healing and hope.
In a broken world.
Yeah.
It's a challenge.
It is, but it's also a privilege. It really makes you think about those big questions.
Doesn't it?
Like, what's my purpose?
Mm-hmm.
How can I make a difference?
What does it mean to live a life that reflects the values of Genesis?
Yeah. Those are the questions that really matter.
They are.
And while Genesis doesn't give us all the answers,
No, it doesn't.
it gives us a roadmap
A set of guiding principles.
to help us navigate life.
I like to think of it as a compass.
A compass, yeah. Pointing us in the right direction.
Exactly. And as we keep studying and reflecting on these stories,
Yeah.
we'll discover new insights, deeper meanings.
That enrich our lives and strengthen our faith.
That's the goal.
Well, this has been an amazing deep dive.
It has.
I'm walking away with a totally new appreciation for Genesis.
Okay.
And a deeper understanding of how it connects to my life.
That's what we were hoping for.
And for our listeners, I hope you've been inspired to revisit these stories.
With fresh eyes.
Yeah. And with open hearts.
Absolutely.
You know, we've talked about a lot of big ideas today, but as we wrap up,
Yeah.
I just want to leave you with this one thought.
Okay.
If Genesis is true, if we really are part of this grand narrative of creation and redemption,
Yeah.
what does that mean for your life?
That's the question.
It is. What choices will you make? What actions will you take? How will you live out your part in this epic story?
Those are questions worth pondering.
They are. Well, that's it for our deep dive into Genesis, folks.
Thanks for joining us.
Until next time, keep seeking, keep exploring, keep diving deep.